Boy placed a small marble on the floor, and to his surprise, it quickly rolled toward the balcony. His father, Pudong, immediately realized that the building might be tilting, but this was his new home, purchased just a few days ago. He quickly called the neighbors and asked them to check if their doors and windows were unusually hard to open or close. He also urged everyone to see if the entire building was leaning. However, the neighbors didn't take it seriously and brushed it off. After they left, Pudong placed the marble on the floor again. This time, though, it stayed in place. His wife also thought he was overreacting. How could a building just start tilting out of nowhere? Pudong didn't press the issue further, but that night, after a heavy rain, the entire building began to sink quietly. The residents, fast asleep, noticed nothing. The next morning, as Pudong was leaving for work, he noticed a deep crack in the previously smooth ground at the entrance of his unit. He urgently reported the situation to the property management, hoping for quick repairs, but several days passed, and the property management still hadn't taken action. Then one morning, Pudong was abruptly awakened by a violent tremor. He realized the windows in his home were cracking. When he looked outside, he was stunned. The community's roads were split open with long cracks, and residents were fleeing in panic. Once he grasped what was happening, Pudong tried to escape, but it was already too late. The ceiling collapsed, and the entire building began plunging downward. In a matter of seconds, the building fell into a massive sinkhole. Fortunately, after falling some distance, the building suddenly stopped, lodged midway. Just then, a car fell from above and hurtled toward the roof, nearly hitting their neighbor, a Thai. A Thai quickly lifted his feet and desperately pushed against the car. After finally managing to shove it away, the building began to sink again. Meanwhile, Pudong was searching for his son. That car had crashed through the balcony and landed right in his living room. Someone inside was desperately banging on the window, pleading for help. When Pudong collected himself and took a closer look, he realized the driver was actually his coworker. He frantically tried to pull the car door open to rescue him, but the handle came off in his hand. To make matters worse, the car began sliding backward. His coworker, Xiao Shuai, was screaming inside, yelling at Lao Piao. He also tried desperately to open the door, but he too pulled off the handle. Luckily, the car eventually got stuck against a wall, and Xiao Shuai managed to climb out through the window. After that, they found another trapped coworker, Xiao Mei, in another room. Everyone gathered on the roof, trying to call for help, but they were too far from the ground to get any signal. They could only yell toward the opening at the top of their lungs, but all they heard in return were echoes and their own heavy breathing. Then, a Thai's son suggested they should first gather some survival supplies, so everyone started working separately. Meanwhile, above ground, search and rescue operations had already begun, but as soon as rescue workers descended into the sinkhole, the surrounding ground collapsed, forcing them to retreat. The rescue team then switched to using drones for exploration. However, the sinkhole was already more than 250 meters deep, and the drone quickly lost signal and crashed. When the survivors saw the drone, their hopes were raised. One man, overcome with excitement, grabbed a device and started shouting for help loudly. Unfortunately, the sound waves triggered another collapse, and the building began sinking again. The ground tilted, and Xiao Shuai almost slid into the abyss. Xiao Mei tried to grab him but couldn't reach. In that critical moment, Xiao Mei noticed a cable hanging above. She quickly climbed upward. Suddenly, a rock tumbled down from above. Reacting swiftly, she leaped aside, narrowly avoiding it. Then she threw one end of the cable to Xiao Shuai, but the cable was old and deteriorated. The moment force was applied, it snapped and broke. A Thai, who was standing at the edge helping, lost his balance and fell backward. A Thai was stuck in a soft mud pit. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. Seeing this, Xiao Mei quickly threw down a rope, but his anxious son, without thinking, jumped into the mud pit. However, one rope could not support the weight of two people. A Thai could only desperately use his hands to hold up his son's face, but this weak effort was ultimately useless. Soon, father and son were swallowed by the mud. At this critical moment, Pudong suddenly had a brilliant idea. He immediately rushed downstairs, grabbed a stool, and smashed the glass window. As the glass shattered, a large amount of mud poured in through the window. Everyone worked together to dig through the mud and finally found the submerged father and son. After clearing the mud from their mouths, the two gradually began to breathe again. At this time, the signal from the external drone also returned to normal. After the drone returned to the ground, the search and rescue team quickly reviewed the footage and confirmed that there were still survivors underground. So they immediately dropped food, living supplies, and a satellite phone via parachute. Pudong grabbed the satellite phone and contacted his wife, but he received bad news. His wife said that their son was missing, and the last known location was in this building. Although the firefighters repeatedly advised against taking action without authorization, Pudong was desperate to save his son and could not just sit and wait, so they quickly found the elevator entrance. Pudong tied the rope around himself, jumped into the elevator shaft, while others above tightly held the other end of the rope. He opened the top cover, climbed into the elevator car, and struggled to pry open the elevator door. At the same time, the ground rescue team began their second round of action. Suddenly, the leaning building nearby collapsed, and debris kept falling into the deep pit. Two falling rocks hit the elevator shaft, causing the rope fixed above to come loose. Pudong below was also hit in the leg by a rock. Enduring the severe pain, he moved the rock away. He searched everywhere for his son's trail. Seeing the small cart on the ground, Pudong's heart tightened. Just then, he heard his son's call from behind. He rushed over and dug through the rubble with his bare hands. Finally, he found Shiokan hiding in a pipe. Pudong excitedly hugged his son. Then he noticed a faint candlelight diagonally above. An old woman holding a candle was sitting quietly there. Pudong climbed into the room to take her away, but the old woman insisted on staying. She wanted to guard her son who had already died. Before parting, she handed Pudong a pair of shoes and a bundle of rope. She told him to put on the shoes and carry Shiokan out. After bidding farewell with tears, Pudong carried his son and began to climb upward. At this time, rain began to fall from the sky, making each step especially difficult. He moved carefully along the outer wall, shouting loudly to his teammates above. The teammates who heard the sound quickly dug through the sand and debris on the ruins. Finally, they pulled the father and son up. After escaping danger, everyone noticed that above the hole there was another crumbling building that could collapse at any moment. Rainwater kept pouring in and soon flooded the stairs. They had to escape here as soon as possible, so they started collecting empty bottles, planning to make a simple life raft. At this moment, a tide dragged over a large yellow barrel. To save their lives, they scrambled to climb into a large barrel, but he alone chose to stay behind. Tai, suppressing his grief, quickly closed the barrel lid, letting his son inside pound and cry desperately. With tears blurring his vision, Tai bid a final farewell to his son, knowing that only by sacrificing himself could he ensure his child's survival. The flood quickly engulfed the surroundings, and the building stuck above collapsed with a roar, pressing the barrel down rapidly. As the pressure continued to build, the barrel suddenly rolled out from one side and began to float upward, but just as it reached halfway up, it got tangled in a bunch of wires. The people inside the barrel worked together to hit the barrel walls, and after several fierce impacts, the barrel finally broke free and continued to rise. Unexpectedly, the next second, it collided with a section of exposed steel bar. A thick steel bar instantly pierced through the barrel wall. Everyone pushed outward desperately, but in the cramped space, they could not exert much force. At that moment, a thumping sound came from outside the barrel. It was Tai. He was still alive. He had survived by finding an oxygen tank. At this moment, he was desperately kicking the barrel with both feet. With the combined force from inside and outside, Tai gathered all his strength for one last blow and finally succeeded in separating the barrel from the steel bar. However, water immediately gushed in through the hole, and everyone fumbled around but could not stop it no matter what. In the critical moment, Xiao Shui suddenly punched through the hole, using his own arm as a piston to barely seal the inflow. Tai outside tried to grab Xiao Shui's hand to escape together, but the barrel was rising too fast, and he still failed to catch his hand. Desperate, Tai slowly sank. At the last moment, a rope hanging from the barrel suddenly tangled around his ankle, and he was pulled upward rapidly by the barrel, finally breaking through the water surface. However, the barrel began to leak, and since the lid could only be opened from the outside, the people inside could do nothing about it. They saw that the water level inside had already risen past halfway. At the critical juncture, Tai's figure appeared again. He mustered the last bit of his remaining strength and lifted the lid. Almost simultaneously, the rescue personnel on the ground also spotted them through surveillance. After going through numerous dangers, they were finally rescued.